Welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast which asks which movies are well worth watching and remembering for all time. Every episode we discuss a different piece of film history to decide if it should make its way into our movie vault. Filled with questions, trivia and crazy challenges, it's the perfect way to deep dive into a myriad of movies. But don't just take my word for it. Here's a glimpse of what to expect in today's episode.
I thought it should have gone in purely because of Sandra Bullock's performance, but obviously it didn't go in because the consent.
What? Sandra Bullock?
So I've screwed that up. That's my mistake.
Julia Roberts.
Julia Roberts. I'm so sorry.
Oh my god. Not that memorable.
Yeah,
you picture a woman's eyes and you just imagine a different face around them. I'm sorry, like it's the Bette Davis eyes effect.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Are you not entertained? I'll be back. Here's Johnny. Oh, hi, Mark.
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
I'm Batman. It's not the baton. It's a silly little and my pretty.
To infinity and beyond. You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
Well, good movies.
Hello and welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast that asks which are the movies well worth watching and which deserve to be remembered for all time. I'm your host, David Oscar, and I'm joined by my co-host, our own Hollywood diva, that is Craig MacDonald. Hello, Craig.
Yep.
So many intros recently, you've just been like, yep, just agree.
Well, no, it's because comparatively they could be so much worse.
I've been kind recently, I guess that's what we're saying.
I don't even think you've been kind. I think it's literally just, if I rage at you for every single thing, then eventually it's just like nothing pleases. So I just have to try and find some concession somewhere.
Right, so Craig, recently we had our episode talking about the Brave Little Toaster. There we sort of alluded to the fact that we're building to 100 official episodes. So obviously things keep changing and growing here. For people who are long-time listeners and have listened since the very beginning, you'll know that the podcast has evolved and grown, and we're continuing to do that. So I guess this is something that we wanted to do since the beginning, but kind of like the pandemic and stuff has kind of like given us some hiccups and stuff like that. But yeah, we're kind of making it clear now that we're going to have some more reoccurring members of the Well Good Movies team, which we already had kind of established. A lot of these people you already know who are frequently on the podcast, but they're going to help us with, the different segments of the show and make sure that we got, the Well Good Movies team who you can sort of more familiarize yourself with and hear episode to episode. So we can't wait to introduce just some of them this episode, but it will be changing. So over in VHS Corner is one of the instigators of the 2023 Demolition Man drama. It is Sarah Williams. Hello, Sarah.
Hello. I'm hanging my head as I walk into this podcast episode. I'm sorry for the chaos that I've caused.
I was like, how do I sum up Sarah's inclusion when she's only been on one episode before, but has already made such a big impact? I'm like, well, it's with the film that just keeps getting brought up episode on episode.
I know. You'll never forget me as that person that brought, Demolition Man into the vault,
So how does it feel over in VHS Corner? Is it quite chilled over there? It seems quite a knowledgeable area? Is there lots of books or VHSs, I guess?
Yeah, there's a bit of dusty VHSs that aren't really being used by a lot of people. Obviously, there's a few Blu-rays and steel books, but yeah, it's nice and cozy in here. Hopefully, a lot of people will enjoy the VHS vault over here corner.
Well, and hopefully you get some company as the weeks go on as well. It'll be like, what was it, Dictionary Corner, I think, on a countdown. You'll have like a co-host who might be like, making jokes and that kind of thing.
So I'm the Susie Dent of Well Good Movies. Is that what we're saying?
This week, yes. We'll see who Susie Dent is.
That's one of the more favourable comparisons you can get on this show, to be fair.
I could have just gone with that intro for yourself, but I was just like, no, instigator of chaos. We'll go for that. And in terms of this week's film, we haven't obviously discussed what it is yet, Sarah, but are you a classic movies person? Are you into sort of old Hollywood? Is this kind of your vibe, would you say?
I would definitely say I've not seen enough classic Hollywood, but I'm always keen to go back and see where things have been, taken elements of, that have inspired many like modern films, or people make, sequels and requels of them all. But yeah, I like going back and watching a black and white film and kind of, having that sort of nostalgia, and, the dialogue always makes me laugh.
Yeah, definitely. And especially with this one. So, yeah, and it's good to go back to something classic, as we've done many times before, but it's been quite a while, as I'm sure we'll discuss. So over to our next set of crew members, which are joining us. So helping us over in the movie vault this week is our now official resident historian, as we've often referred to him as our kind of like go-to historian, but now he's agreed that he'll help out a lot more often. It is our good friend, Di Hill, who is also completing the duo of Florakis and Hill. But to be clear, I'm not saying the entire name. Di, how are you?
Hey guys, I'm not doing too bad.
That's good. Okay,
Well, that's
so
right. I'm slightly unwell, so if people start talking to me and there's a slight gap, it's because I'm slightly under the weather and struggling to focus. So I'll be joining in as much as I can, but mostly listening today, I think.
Well, we appreciate the dedication, Di. It's like a true historian. You've come out despite the rain, that kind of.
And please, whatever you do, do not live up to your name.
Yeah, you can make it, Di. You're gonna be okay.
Don't say that sentence. It's so conflicted. You're gonna make it die.
Well, as a true medical historian, I did spend this weekend in the secret library of St. David's Cathedral reading old medical books about kind of medieval lockdowns. So, yeah, if you want any sort of ancient medical information, for this weekend only, I know a bit about it.
It's like that. That's not for this episode. That would be impressive if it was. It's just like, whatever we're discussing, you're like, I've gone to this like library somewhere in the UK to find out about it. But no,
I've literally been in an ancient library learning about it.
It's like the beginning of one of those Channel 5 documentaries. Like, today we're looking at the history of All About Eve, and my journey starts here in the medical library of this cathedral.
Yeah.
And Di, you've been on, I guess, a few more times talking about these kind of like old classic movies. Is your appreciation of them building or decreasing? Obviously, one of your early appearances was talking about something like Frankenstein. But then when I look back, we've had things like Charlie Chaplin, etc. But then also you've talked about like modern masterpieces like Thunderbirds. So which do you prefer?
Well, I find, particularly doing this with you guys, I've got more and more into anything that is an adaptation of something else. I love that comparison of things, and to see like, where things are coming from and what bits they're picking on and what they're not, and how they're adapting things. And, you've got a rule of what makes a thing good, and then you can compare it to what, maybe is better, maybe is worse. Frankenstein, better than the book. Thunderbirds, not as good as the original show.
Yeah.
So, it's fun that way.
And as I alluded to as well, we are joined by the other half of the duo that was originally Florakis and Hill. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out one of our endgame specials from back in the day. So it is our resident film brain, Stefanos Florakis. Hello, Stefanos.
Hello, darling. How are you doing today?
What a appropriate way to come on to this episode, considering what we're talking about.
And come on to David.
But also just come on to, the introduction of yourself into our circle as well.
Oh, absolutely, darling. I mean, thank goodness I quit smoking 3 years ago, because right now I'll be dying in cancer.
So I guess by that, do I really need to ask the question about like old classic movies for yourself? Again, you've previously like reeled off all the winners of the Oscars, etc. in the past. So, but then you also see all the new stuff that comes out too. So I don't know, is it kind of 50-50 in your head? Do you find yourself going back to the old stuff a lot, or are there just kind of like some key ones that you love?
Well, just like the date of release of the film we're going to talk to, it is 50-50. So it really depends. Obviously, there is the appreciation of it. And especially like during that period is a very fascinating study to do, because of the things like you guys already mentioned, that there's a lot of things that we took away from, but also there are some other aspects about that time period and even before that is kind of, well, dodgy, say the least. So I am glad that we are better than that, even though how things are going right now in Hollywood's not as big of improvement as it should have been. But yeah, like, but I do see it all as a cautionary tale. And yeah, and this specific film did a lot of things that I kind of forgotten about, as it is some things that we have taken like for granted now, but back then it was way ahead of its time. So yeah, it still is a 50-50 because of we could go into details afterwards, but for this specific film, I am actually excited to talk to, even though Sunset Boulevard was better. Anyways.
We've teased this film enough already. So, Craig, for those who didn't catch our last episode, can you just catch us up on how we came to talk about this film and what it is we are talking about?
So last episode, we were discussing the Neon Demon, and in the end, we had an endgame all about the names of chemical elements in various films, where David took on our guest Kelechi, and Kelechi was the victor, and decided to go with her film choice for this week, which is All About Eve from 1950.
Honored members, ladies and gentlemen, for distinguished achievement in the theater, the Sarah Siddons Award to Miss Eve Harrington.
I'm going to take you to Margot. Oh, no. Oh, yes, she's got to meet you.
She's quite a girl, is what's her name?
Eve. I'd forgotten they grew that way. I take it she read well.
It wasn't a reading, it was a performance. Brilliant, vivid, something made of music and fire.
How nice. After all you've said, don't you know that part was written for Margot? It might have been 15 years ago. It's my part now.
You're quite a girl.
You think? Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Just to go into a little bit of details about this film, the synopsis is a seemingly timid but secretly ruthless ingenue instigates herself into the lives of an aging Broadway star and her circle of theatre friends. So this is the film, which is directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz, also known for various films such as Honey Pot, Cleopatra, Guys and Dolls, and Julius Caesar, for which he also wrote those along with this film, as well as Mary Orr, who goes uncredited for this role. Music by Alfred Newman, cinematography by Milton R. Krasner, editing by Barbara McLean. Insofar as the cast, we have starring as Margot, Bette Davis. We have Anne Baxter as Eve Harrington, George Sanders as Addison DeWitt, Celeste Holm as Karen, Gary Merrill as Bill Simpson, Hugh Marlowe as Lloyd Richards, edit, not as my notes has edited Hugh to Hi. It's not Hi Marlowe, it's Hugh Marlowe. And finally, with an appearance from Marilyn Monroe as Miss Caswell. So that is All About Eve.
Cool. Right. Well, we can't wait to deep dive into All About Eve and eventually ask the question of whether it deserves the honor of a place in our movie vault, our vault that encapsulates memorable movies for all time. And interestingly, will this carry on the string or will this change the run? But we haven't had a movie vault entry now for 3 episodes, guys. So that's also quite interesting in terms of our discussion. But I don't want to influence anything in that way. Do we want?
I don't want to influence, but I'm going to point out we haven't had a win for a while.
But also, do you want to stick to that streak as well? You could take it either way.
God, you're a used car salesman, I swear to God.
So, yeah, All About Eve from 1950. I think what's really cool about discussing this film is that definitely this year we have had a lot of late 80s, 90s, sort of like early noughties. There's definitely been a lot of different sort of themes and vibes that we've had throughout the year. And I think that this is kind of refreshing to go back to something a bit more classic, old school Hollywood, and kind of see the differences, a bit like what Stefanos was alluding to there at the beginning. So to give us a bit of context for that time period and for Hollywood in the 50s, I go to our guys in helping us out in the movie vault this week. Di, have you got anything interesting just about this sort of time period in general in terms of the 1950s, or is it mainly sort of over to Steph for sort of the movie kind of stuff, do you think?
Well, the main bit of broad context that I think kind of overwhelms this movie is the Hays Code era, is the sort of ultra conservatism going on in society, and it really kind of seeps through this movie, right down to the fact that the famous part of the Hays Code is that you couldn't see like a married couple or you couldn't see two people in bed together without people having their legs out or whatever. In this movie, when there's a married couple in their bedroom together, they've got separate beds on either side of the room. It's so obsessed with desexualizing and conservating whatever all of the people. And so that's the thing to really bear in mind. And I think, really, really informs this movie.
And Steph, what would you say in terms of like just the kind of vibe for the movies of this time and what we were saying, like the kind of the stars, was it all about those kind of like actors and those studios and the stories? Again, it's not like now in which you kind of have to pull somebody in with kind of a franchise or kind of like sequels. This very much was in terms of like the kind of art itself, was what heightened these movies in terms of like, was it a compelling story? Was it like a really great romance? Was there like a big star which you had to go see?
So the interesting thing about it is the fact of how cynical it is. It's not like we didn't have other cynical films about the performance arts back then, but this is something very specific about female actors in the performance arts, and the fact that even when they go to the lengths of becoming as cruel and cunning as the men counterparts in the industry, they still don't have power. I mean, not many things have changed, unfortunately, but it is interesting that that was sort of a conversation back then, even though I tried to look at other reviews, and there weren't many reviews who were discussing about that. They were discussing about specifically about the character being the villain, but in today's eyes, in today's windows, we can see very differently, and that is how I took it. But the Hays Code is very much there. And once Di said it, I could feel the bones inside me just shivering. But there's still a lot of things that work for it. Like one thing that it was a big deal back then is the fact that Bette Davis was playing a character of her age. It is not like it wasn't unheard of, but for the fact that someone as big as her to play that kind of character, almost to a point of felt very more autobiographical, even though it is not. And may I even say, like, maybe there is some queer coding in there, because it is very much well known that Bette Davis was very much queer. But there are those things in there. She was always able to bring that out in her performance, even though not many people were able to read it. Well, the right people were able to read it, and that's what really mattered. But yeah, there's a lot of different things. And also, like, a bit of a stretch, but that's how my brain works. The character of DeWitt, it was one of the very rare times where I see like a critic having that kind of power just because he has an outlet. And that kind of, fortunately, how we are right now, other men of that kind of power getting an outlet and saying things that shouldn't be said. And unfortunately, yeah, there's a lot of those things, and I really was surprised, while at the same time still having a humor with it, which again, it was something that a lot of these films needed to have back then. And especially because it was after the Second World War. So they needed to bring back all the audience that they lost due to the creation of TV back to the theaters. But even then, even though there was still the charm that we all know of the classic era of Hollywood, it still ended up being way darker while following the Hays Code, while having all those restrictions, but still providing the story that kind of stayed alive, and then we kind of trying to not replicate. I don't like the word replicate or copy, but evolve to the more socio-political elements that we're starting realizing were active around us.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, actually, I suppose, when you look at it from the point of view of the dark, cynical aspect of it, especially, as you said, being kind of after the war, because you can easily watch it and be like, oh yeah, classic Hollywood movie, especially when you've got somebody like Marilyn Monroe appearing. But that idea of, the big lines and kind of like elements of romance and the big sweeping music. But then again, when you look at something like, Gone with the Wind or something like that, in which is more kind of during the war period, or, potentially could be said just before in terms of maybe production or the kind of like audience it was going for, that is more of a kind of an epic and kind of this sweeping romance. And a lot of films which then would get compared or mentioned within this time, they can be maybe more genre pieces or adaptations of books, and I think that you have something like Singing in the Rain, which, as you said, then is probably that more idealistic Hollywood representation, whereas this has gone down that more so like darker, more cynical route, which things like Sunset Boulevard, as we've mentioned, could be aligned with. And then, films which do involve those kind of, male, female sort of like protagonists, antagonists. So you've got like, The Apartment, Rebecca, a lot of the stars of this film, sort of crossing over into the different ones. So yeah, it is very indicative of its time. But yeah, it's a good point that it's not actually just, oh, this is a typical 50s Hollywood movie. It's very much speaking to a kind of like what we were talking about with the 80s and stuff recently, about like commenting on maybe the kind of people's vibe and feeling of that time of being a sort of darker period, and maybe creatives were feeling that as well. In terms of our experiences then, and talking about, the story and everything like that, let's go through what people's experiences are with this film. So Sarah, had you ever seen this before? Was it one you knew much about?
I'll be honest and say that I'd never even heard of this title before. Well, however, once I told people that I was going to watch it, that, oh my gosh, you've never seen that film. I was like, it's never been on my radar. Absolutely never been on my radar. Like I said, I'm trying to watch more classic films. And ashamedly, as I was watching this film, it took about 2/3 into the film that I realised that was Bette Davis. And I turned to my housemate who I was watching this with. I was like, is that who that song's about? And it just sort of clicked. I was like, oh, okay. Because we were commenting on her eyes. So I was like, that makes a lot of sense. It was very much a mind-blowing kind of moment. But yeah, like I said, didn't know anything about this film going into it. I didn't watch any trailers this time. So yeah, I was going in very much sort of fresh face, and just, yeah, I think that was the best way, because I think these older trailers, I don't know if anyone else agrees, but the sort of the classic films, their trailers gave a lot away in terms of the plots and sort of, yeah. So I'm glad I went into this sort of not knowing anything.
And they already kind of want to line you up in terms of maybe what you're going to feel or something. They're like, a sweeping romance, a thing for the decade, and they're using all these big sort of like
it's
metaphors.
The voiceovers, isn't it, on the old trailers?
Exactly. I think that almost sounds like a similar experience I sometimes have with older movies, or like classic ones, or sort of ones ingrained in pop culture, in which I'll watch them for the first time and then be like, oh, that's what The Simpsons was referencing. So that moment of being like, oh, that's who the song is about, that kind of that moment. I think for myself, it's maybe not as far as like not hearing about it at all, but it was definitely one which I knew the name and maybe sort of knew the stars and stuff. But yeah, I had never actually sort of sat down and watched this one specifically. Again, I think because there's so many classic Hollywood films that are kind of on those lists, and you see certain ones. But this one I don't find is as kind of, I wouldn't say as highly recommended, because as you say, everyone you talk to about it is kind of like, oh my God, it's an amazing film. But I don't think it's kind of like a sort of Breakfast at Tiffany's or something like that, in which you kind of, know the poster and that kind of thing. So yeah, this was the first watch for myself. Craig, what about yourself?
I'm with Sarah on this. I'd never heard of it, never watched it before.
And Di?
Yeah, I'd heard of it. And I knew, well, the kind of image of it being kind of Hollywood glamour, and that's about it. And I knew, what's this up? Marilyn Monroe. I knew that was an early one of hers, I think. This is where I'd come across it. But that was it, really. I didn't know the plot. I don't know much about Bette Davis other than that she's, was this kind of icon who persevered throughout her whole life. But yeah, beyond that, it was all a bit new to me.
And Stefanos, it's not so much probably a rare occurrence for you in which you're in a room in which you're like, I've seen that film, but nobody else has, because that probably happens to you quite a lot. But maybe with such a famous movie, that's a bit more rare. So yeah, you have had a lot more experience with us with this film. So what was your previous experience with All About Eve?
So it's always been one of those classic films that I was always either hearing about, or it was always on TV, or I've seen segments about it. And I'm pretty sure I've seen it multiple times. I just don't know. It's the same way as with Star Wars. Like, I know I have seen it more than 50 times, not by choice, all of them. It was just my dad putting the VHS in, and I was a baby, so I had no saying about this. So it was one of those cases. But then I was getting older, I was getting into film and cinema. And then I started hearing, things like All About Eve was within, at least at that time, within this film circles, was known about two things. One, of that this is possibly the biggest film of Bette Davis. Like for a long time, if I would hear about only one film about Bette Davis, it was this one, until someone would bring up Baby Jane. So it was always those two. And the second one, the fact that it won the Oscar instead of Sunset Boulevards. And there was a period that I was dismissing the quality of All About Eve because I prefer Sunset Boulevards. That was past toxic me. I'm not like that anymore. I love all films equally now. But yeah, Sunset Boulevard is better.
Oh, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, but again, mainly because Sunset Boulevard is closer to the kind of films I like. But yeah, that was the two things that I knew about the most. But then, I started uni, I started watching more of these films. And yeah, then I became more critical about them. And yeah, so that is sort of the relationship. And to be fair, I watched it again after like nearly a decade for this podcast. So, which is very interesting because now that I have a very different perspective on cinema. And yeah, there were some times that my stupid brain sometimes would think, you know what, this would be a really fun episode in like indie low budget comedy on a streamer. Like that's how it felt sometimes. Like I could easily see Phoebe Waller-Bridge writing that kind of script.
True. It's funny about the way this film has come about as well, is because it feels like we've gone through so many of like the themes and films that got influenced by this before talking about this movie. So the fact that we talked about Showgirls, we talked about Neon Demon, which led to us talking about this, and all of them are playing with those same ideas of, people who, aspire to somebody else and, are using like ruthless tactics and kind of giving you a sort of window into like a certain world, whether that, be dancing or the theater, etc. So it's interesting to watch from that perspective, kind of to go back to what we were saying with Sarah, of that kind of like, oh, this is what that's referencing, or that's why I know this person. So not only you kind of watching like, oh, that's where this film has got that inspiration from, like literally with this podcast now, we're like, oh, okay, that's why that was happening when we were discussing this film, or that's what they were trying to do, or, have been inspired by. As to the success, I'm sure, Craig would have his thoughts there, especially when it comes to Showgirls.
Why me specifically?
Because you've been on both Neon Demon and Showgirls as episodes no one else has. Yeah, I've stumped him for once.
You haven't stumped me. I'm just not going to argue with you.
Sarah, I guess you already did mention it, but, what do you think in terms of like the vibes you get from? Do you think it is kind of like, oh, yeah, this is... Well, obviously we've said that this is indicative in some ways of films that are made in that era, but do you think it is interesting when you look at just how vastly different they are to films that we might get now, or you might get in the 80s or the 90s?
Yeah, definitely. When I was watching this, I was thinking about how okay, maybe, the camera movements and stuff aren't that, creative, like with what we get today, in terms of, tracking shots and, these creative upside down cameras and all this. But in that era, I guess it's more about the script and dialogue, because a lot of people maybe used to the theatre, trying to find their sort of footing with what people like, trying to get people into the cinema as opposed to the theatre, I think was a massive thing.
I guess people had more like there'd be like an intermission, you'd watch multiple films, or there might be like a short film that plays beforehand and stuff.
Yeah, you have a B movie and everything, so it's a whole kind of experience. It feels like you're going for an evening out, whereas nowadays I guess it's more casual, and you want that fast paced, you might want that fast editing that they couldn't necessarily do back in the day. But yeah, it's interesting because I really like the sort of the set design. There was one moment where they were in a house, I think it's the sort of the party for Bill. It's like a delayed party. It really, and this is very modern view to say, but it really reminded me of WandaVision. They sort of do those flashback scenes, and obviously it's homaging these kind of films and this era, but it literally felt like that in terms of the whole set design and the costumes, which again, it's not original by any means, but it's having that sort of that question you were saying about, will modern sort of people look back at these films and look at the different techniques? And yeah, I mean, looking further into this film's been referenced by a lot of people. It was on William Friedkin's, some of his favorite films that he mentioned that I watched recently. I think it's one of these, because the themes are so strong, regardless of how it's filmed, or maybe the messaging at time and what the cultural impact was. It seems to have lasted 70 years on, really. So I think it's always going to be sort of relevant, regardless of the quality and maybe sort of simple cinematic techniques in some ways, because it's such a strong script and performance. It's always going to be there.
Yeah, I guess potentially that's why sometimes these films, the story, as you mentioned, and the performances stand out more, because, the scores are very similar. It is that kind of like, right, bring in the person to do the big theatrical, do sweeping music, the same as they did in some other film, which almost, again, is like the theatre, and because you would have orchestras just playing, right, play that thing that you played in the last one, or, something like that. The shots are more kind of like static. You get that whole typical scene in a car in which like there's a screen behind them or something, and then you just get that like awkward shot in which it's like, oh, the lighting's gone really bad by here because they're now outside, they're not in a kind of like brightly lit studio. So yeah, definitely here the kind of performances, the story, the dialogue especially is a lot more front and center. So I guess before we get onto that stuff, is there anything else technically anybody would sort of mention about this film?
Yeah, I'd say what Sarah was saying, the thing that, while the camera work is not, was fantastically elaborate and the editing is quite slow, they make up for that in the blocking. So, as in, with a theatre play, it's all about the movement of the characters and how they relate to each other. And through that, it allows an actor to, really express and go wild with their performance. So, yeah, that's something which you don't see in a lot of modern movies, where people tend to stand still a lot and explain things to each other. This is a movie where the camera moves with people rather than cutting at them. So yeah, that's kind of when you've got very simple camera stuff, you replace it with elaborate movement and blocking.
Also, it does have, which I completely forgot about it has one of the most interesting thematically and also creatively shots, and it's the final one, the very final shots with basically the new Eve holding the awards from the mirrors, and we're seeing all these almost like replicas of her. Like this is like the ongoing like chain of new coming actors, no matter of talent or promise, all of them just continuing that chain of corruption, of being under the control of this chaotic industry. And yeah, it's very fascinating one that it really reminded me. I don't know why it came to my head, but it really reminded me of the final shot of The Favorite by Yorgos Lanthimos. It had a very similar thematic sort of feeling to it, that this is like an unending suffering to it. And it was a very interesting one. It was a very interesting because, yeah, like you all said, it generally speaking, it is a quite simple filmmaking overall. It's like it is shots almost like being a play, which again, it was like one of the best things for that era. If you were into plays, but you weren't able to afford going to a play, there you go. You had that on the big screen at an affordable price. So that was the beauty of it. And they did mention in the film as well. But that specific shot in the end is the most cinematic the film has been. Which also I do feel is sort of and that kind of sort of an irony when you have a film about theater people saying, well, very bad things about the Hollywood system. Here we have a very cinematic shot, basically critiquing theater people themselves.
This film has one of the slowest openings I've ever dealt with. Like, I understand this critique of the industry and, you know, sort of build up exactly what they're trying to do. But my God, there did not need to be as much narration as there was talking about, like, the skill of the actor. You could trim some of that back. Like, it felt overly pretentious, and it was a bit of a block for me for a while as to what it is the film was actually trying to achieve. Like, I don't think you fully get the effect of, you know, just how toxic this industry can be with having some people be so congratulatory about it, especially in that particular way. Yeah, I will say a lot of the narration of this film bothered me.
Yeah, the change in narrators I thought was quite interesting angle to go at it from. And I was impressed sometimes again with some of these older films in which I was like, okay, I'm like engaged in the story from the get-go. I think the way that they kind of like untangle things, maybe it's a bit like what Dai was saying, it's a bit that the setup and the blocking and everything kind of helps you to be a bit more like in the story and feel like you're watching something like a theater production. So I didn't have as much problem with the kind of like, yeah, the build up. But you do often, these films are kind of a bit more famous, I suppose, as well for kind of like giving you the nitty gritty, like right at the end as well, especially with some of the older films we watched in the past, in which like you get like at that 2 hour mark and you're like, all right, where's this going? And then like the last 10-20 minutes are like crazy or something, which you're like, oh, right, okay, here it is.
Oh yeah, I fully enjoyed the last 20 minutes of this film. I think had the majority of the film been, I think, a bit tighter like that, I would have had like a much smoother experience.
Yeah, interesting. I think it's quite effective in terms of like building up those characters, and I think, you know, I enjoyed it a bit like what Steph was saying in terms of...
I think it's effective at building up some characters. There are some where I have issues.
Yeah, I think like Stefanos was comparing it to Sunset Boulevard. It's that same effect of like, I'm interested in this character and this character.
Yeah, but like the characters in Sunset Boulevard, I think, are the ones driving the action. I think the characters where I need to see more of what they're doing throughout the film and not the ones that we actually see a lot of focus on. So, for example, for a film which is all about Eve, I'm genuinely surprised a lot of the plot didn't actually show Eve doing these things. A lot of it is just, like, notice how even the flip for, like, you know, the main character not liking her is literally being told by her friend, I don't like her because this is what she's doing. She's like, oh shit, you're right. Yeah, I'm not going to like it now anymore. It's just, why can we not just see more of those interactions before you have that sort of penny drop moment? Like, why can't we see more instances of Eve actually trying to just do these things rather than just set up, instantly go into this, right?
I completely agree with Craig. I mean, I thought that Margot was Eve for a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So I was really confused. It's like you say, like, we don't see a lot of Eve, and I'm like, oh, when it first happens, like, there's that scene in the dressing room. I think it's when Bill first came in, and I was like, oh, is she Eve? Who's Eve? Like, the lack of Eveness in this film is insane. I wanted to see, like you say, those off-screen moments on screen. I wanted to see her being like little conniving, little deceitful little woman, like manipulating everyone.
The worst that we see for a while is that she takes that dress and imagines herself in it, which I don't think is that vindictive, to be honest. Like, it's a nice dress. I can imagine some people, if they had the chance, would be like, yeah, this would be nice. It doesn't scream, I'm going to wreck your entire life just to get what I want.
Yeah.
Like,
it's not very psycho killer, is it? You know?
Yeah, not even any significant hints that she, like, wants Bill as well, because that also just feels like I just need to have everything you have, which includes your man, I guess.
for me, I guess the imbalance, which I can see what you're saying is, which I felt was maybe, the Margot Eve was strange. And I did think like, oh, well, I thought this was all about Eve. This seems to be all about Margot. And so I enjoyed the fact that they kind of used Margot to kind of show that kind of like frenzy that somebody can get into, or that kind of like somebody says that one or two things and you kind of are consumed by this idea, which, later on I think is quite effective when it's like her and Bill having that argument, and he's saying about like, I can't believe we're having this conversation, where does this all come from? And then as he walks away, she's like, are you going to see Eve? And he's just like, right there, I've now understand how this is happening. So I think to show it from her point of view, you could have done that more effectively by centering more on Eve. But I think what they were going for, and which I do think is effective, is the fact that they're showing everyone else's reaction to Eve. So to me, I don't think that she should have been more front and center. I don't think that you should have seen her like being more scheming and conniving.
But my issue then is that she seems to get a significant amount of punishment by the end of the film for somebody who like doesn't seem to warrant it. I think the frenzy effect is more effective when it turns out that the person's just actually innocent. If you know what I mean, if it's literally everyone's interpretation sort of poisoning the mind, it turns out actually no, there's nothing wrong with this. It doesn't seem as like interesting as this person's being bad. Oh yeah, you're right. You're being bad. Yes.
Yeah, well, I guess I kind of see it as just this is the circle of it keeps happening, as Stefanos was saying with the end shot. I think that, it is strange that, again, Margot has so much...
I'm just saying narratively it just doesn't feel as satisfying.
Yeah. And I think the fact that Margot takes up so much of that time, what I think is effective is just the fact of, like, showing everyone's reactions to her and kind of almost the film saying, oh, it's all about Eve, but she kind of just goes under the radar for so long. Again, that is part of her plan, really, that she's like, I'm just innocent and I'm just doing this. And it is very much a sudden change when you see her, because a lot of the things she's doing when you don't see on screen. And then the one scene in which you do see her do that is to Karen, is it? In which she then says like, oh, well, I'm going to, tell the papers what you did, etc. So that's where you see that turn, which, yes, is quite late in the game to have that. But I don't know. I think in some ways it is more effective because you've seen her as the innocent that everyone else has seen her for so long. So by the end of it, I kind of see it as more like they're the jaded characters that have been affected by her manipulation. But again, it's not to say that she's been impacted or hard done by it. It's just going to happen again.
Like, so. I don't disagree with all of these things in principle. I just think pacing wise, for me, there needed to be a different balance, right? I think everything you've described, I think can work.
Yeah.
If literally there's just a little bit more, right? If there's just a little bit more time, you see them sort of together and just see the ways in which she sort of operates within personal life, then the hint of, right, oh, this is what she's doing is dropped. Then there's more time to dwell on that. Yeah. And then you basically sort of analyze more of these movements. I agree with you. I don't think she needed to be like they didn't have to be like a lot of this maliciousness, but they just needed to be things that you could read malicious intent into. Yeah. I just don't think there was enough of that before just the sort of penny dropped as no, she's being manipulative. Yeah. So I don't agree with you in concept. I'm just saying pacing wise, it just needed to be a bit more spread out.
Yeah.
Like the film's 2.5 hours long. I think it had the time it could do that.
And it does a lot of big leaps. It does like she was in that play and then she won the award. Go back to it like, okay, yeah, she's so...
Especially considering I also think you also need something to sort of link up to the sort of end conclusion of just, you're not actually Eve Harrington at all. You're this other woman who's just turned out to be a total psychopath. Yeah. Her parents are alive and they're looking for you.
Yeah, I know. I was wondering where this was going. Is this going to be like, you're a murderer and you killed somebody? I was like, oh God. But I'm glad they stuck on the kind of like actors, performers or train rather than going down some crazy kind of like mystery box thing. But I'll go to the other person whose this was the first time watch. So Di, what's your overall thoughts of the movie?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I agree to a large extent with Craig. I think the whole thing of Eve not featuring that much is all about building a suspense of is she genuinely a villain or not, and it's about building suspense. But I think the point where it falls down is that, as you say, there's not really any scenes highlighting between Margot and Eve. We're not really learning about their relationship. There's a huge opportunity for them to maybe have a friendship or have like a mentorship or, build any kind of relationship other than just this sort of vague master servant thing. And then when it comes to the twist and everything goes wrong, they don't have any kind of confrontation or scene together. The whole conclusion really is that kind of Margot says, oh, well, I'm abandoning acting altogether and becoming a wife. And Eve is literally just in another room for that point. So, yeah, I think it loses a lot of its dramatic resolution. It builds up a lot of tension with the kind of what's Eve all about. But then it completely drops it by, not really highlighting or focusing on the relationship between the two lead characters. It's left for everybody else to just faff about, and none of the other characters are really particularly interesting.
Yeah, because there's that one snide line that Margot gives to Eve after she's accepted that award, and that's it.
Again, I think that's where it does seem like they're kind of like entranced by Margot and by just the sheer fact of production-wise, like, Bette Davis. So I think the fact that they want to kind of go with like, these are all the people jaded by her and they're at that award ceremony and she thanks each one of them. So I think if it wasn't Bette Davis playing Margot, then it might be more of a balanced kind of like, these are all the people jaded and affected by her. But because it was Bette Davis, it was like, we need to focus more on her. So like you said, they do set it up to be these two central characters, but I think they probably didn't ideally intend that. It's just because they had Bette Davis in it, then it had to become she was a bigger character, but she was still a part of the group of people that were jaded by it.
By the way, can we just establish this now? Because it's dawned on me that the way that David and I are saying her name is different to everyone else's.
Yeah, sorry,
It's Betty Davis as opposed to Bette Davis. David and I have screwed this up, haven't we?
I'd say Bette Davis.
Yeah, because if it is the song, she's got Betty Davis eyes. Oh, yeah, then yeah, true, we've screwed this up. Yeah. I'm saying this now so we don't get like lambasted for this later on.
In my head, I was like, I'm sure everyone said Bette Davis, but then I looked at her name and I'm like, wait.
Well, yeah, because we're thinking of like Bette Midler, but that's spelled like Beth Midler. So that's on us.
I mean, if it makes you feel any better, it's a fake name. It's actually a nickname.
Oh, in that case, I couldn't give a shit.
By a close friend of hers. And because I think the studio wanted her to change her actual name, she was like, no, I'm not going to change my name for you. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make my first name shorter. So eat that or I'm going to leave. She was a badass.
Okay. Fair. So, Steph, I guess, does it come down to you to then like massively defend this film? Or?
Massively?
Well, I guess you've already, by your admittance, Sunset Boulevard is better. So I guess you've already kind of, you're not like his biggest fan in.
No, it's a phenomenal film. But again, it's one of those films that I've known for so long that I cannot see differently to what it is. I think we all kind of have these films where we cannot see them being any other way. So it was always one of those things. But the thing that I realized watching it now is, by the way, all those criticisms you all gave, they are very valid, but only if we think of it as a film made today, or at least made approximately to a time period that we are very familiar. Because this kind of narrative is a very normal back then. It was a very normal narrative. Also, the fact that it's 2 hours long and longer, it was during that time where they had to be that long, so they would have a good excuse to be in as many theaters as possible so they can attract people going there. That is why during those 3 decades, we had films 3-4 hours long because they needed to prove a point. So yeah, that's for sure something that I can agree that the pacing in the first hour is quite slow. But the way I see it, though, even though the title is all about Eve, it's not though. The way I view it, it's about the performance industry and specifically the theater industry that is very socially classed to be to the biggest and like most powerful people in the social elite, and the fact of how a reputation of an artist, as especially of a woman, can change drastically just based on third account statements. Not because I truly think that every perspective we see is not the truth. I don't think we ever see the actual objective truth of what actually occurred until the very end, when DeWitt reveals himself to be the actual villain of the story. And unfortunately, it is the person who is our narrator, is the one who has created Eve's career up to the point of where she gains the awards and goes to Hollywood. That is my interpretation of it. Now, for Bette Davis, yes, that is true that I do believe Margot's character wasn't supposed to be that big, but because Betty was part of it, they had to make some adjustments. I do think it still was a debatable thing for the Oscars because both Bette Davis and Anne Baxter were for leading actress, which is very unfortunate because I do think Betty if she should have gone for supporting, and she would have won. But yeah, it's one of those things that there's so many different factors in here about the narrative, the pacing, and the length, the running time of its character. But yeah, the way I view it as an ensemble. I view it as an ensemble piece of all these different characters. Even the fact that each character is something different. There's none of them actually doing the same kind of like role in the theater. I find that very interesting. That's why each perspective is very different than others. And the fact that the most human perspective, you could say, is Karen's, because Karen is the one who is not part of the industry, is married to it, but she's the only one who sees the human elements of each one. And the fact that the only one who saw the sensitivity of Eve is her. But I do think her experience with everyone else has basically taken down her empathy. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things in here. There's a big conversation about it. But again, it's very entertaining for me to see all your ideas and perspectives about this this is your first time watching it. Because I am wondering how it would have been if I watched it for the first time.
I'm just so conflicted now on whether she's such a Karen, because she's like empathetic and sympathetic. I'm like, oh, she's not a Karen. But then, like you said, she was also jaded and
this was like also like 50 years ago, David. She probably was like that then, but grew up.
But how great would it be if we watched a film from 1940 and there was a character called Karen who was just an absolute arsehole, and you're like, oh, yeah, it's always been the way. And I think for me, it's, go back as well what you were saying earlier, Sarah, about, the technical aspects compared to things like the writing. I think for me, it's because the themes are so strong and they're so compelling that, that does help me in the way that I was sort of watching it, and that it does sort of carry through some of the kind of like pacing issues or character issues a bit more, because they're so strong and clear in what they're trying to say. There's so many films now, and maybe even back then, which would be like those themes become secondary. And I think we could all agree again that a film which has its intent on what it wants to be and what it wants to say first is always better than the other way around. So, and again, as to how successful this is, I probably would agree with Stefanos and Craig. I think the Sunset Boulevard does it better. But I do still appreciate the way that it kind of like shows that kind of like cynicism of Hollywood, and the kind of like the way that like actresses could be used and their time in the spotlight, and that very influential nature of like a journalist, a writer, and the way that things can change and alter so much, even just within like personal dynamics. The fact that each one of them is telling their point of view from their own perspective, but situations are being manipulated by different characters and altering. I thought it was just a very kind of human and compelling and realistic way of showing that. Sarah, what was the sort of standouts for you in terms of like themes and the storyline in that way?
For me, I really appreciate what Steph sort of brought to the table. I've not really looked at it in that way. I took it very much face value, I would say. This is a story about theatre and the dynamics of that and these different roles within that. But I think, the script itself is, it's kind of, dare I say, like satirical at times. It makes, it picks apart the theatre's sort of tropes and the people in which like inhabit the theatre behind the scenes. But I think it's really those sort of sharp, witty bits of dialogue that come a lot from Margot in this, which really sort of stood out for me. And, you know, we've talked about a lot of like sort of general negatives, but I think, you know, there is a lot of positives in there, and I think it comes from performance, especially from Bette Davis. Like, I've, you know, never seen her in anything else before, so this is my sort of introduction to her, and I'm very much invested in much more of her work because she seems like a badass. She seems like, you know, both an actress and, you know, chooses roles which, you know, broke boundaries at the time, and, you know, I'm sure Steph can enlighten me on those, but yeah, I think the themes and the sort of narrative plot points are quite obvious, but I think it does what it needs to do, and is, in the terms of the era it came out, I think it is effective, and probably was effective. I'm sure that's why it's lasted so long, because it's not only is it effective in the 1950s era, it's also effective now with those commentary on, you know, sly critics that are bringing blondes to parties and telling them to accept drinks with men. Like, I was gagged at how like in real that was like to nowadays. And I liked like Marilyn Monroe's, like, no one's really mentioned Marilyn Monroe, but I loved her character in this, and I could see those little elements of who she was going to become, and that kind of self-awareness of the whole theatre situation and filmmaking situation. So I found it really interesting in that there's really sort of two-hander like comments I loved from like multiple scenes in this film. I think that was just great.
And just the way the characters respond, and the script, I think, again, is, you know, one of the strongest. Again, like Sunset Boulevard, you know, especially, again, Bette Davis's character. But I think even as well in terms of like Eve herself, you know, and that's helped by Anne Baxter. I think that, you know, they do have some like fantastic dialogue to work with here. And some really like memorable ones. You know, there's loads in the quotes, you know, like Sunset Boulevard, again, of like that whole idea of like, it's the pictures that turn small. It's kind of going for that very like, you know, famous kind of like, you know, oh, every line is a kind of like, you know, big memorable line because it's so theatrical. And especially Bette Davis is being so kind of like on the nose and kind of bold with every sort of delivery that she has. So I think that, you know, is what stood out to me. And like you said, it is almost sometimes satirical. I think the fact that even Karen sort of breaks into laughter at one point, you know, I think was quite a great moment in terms of like, it wasn't just, oh, she wants that part and they're both fighting for it. I liked that her character just go like, yeah, you know what? You know, I shouldn't be playing like a character that's too young for me. And she, you know, she's happy not to do that role. So then the fact that like Karen sort of breaks into laughter, you know, about the absurdity of the entire scenario. But I thought that's what was interesting, is what built up to that is just that kind of how people can get themselves riled up about certain situations which just happen by circumstance or just natural progression in terms of like, yeah, well, we got her there, you know, their car's broken down and she purposely did that because at the time, you know, as she said, she was like, yeah, I think she would see the funny side. And yeah, I think this is the right thing to do because again, it's showing the party scene, for example, in which that critic could say like, you know, or anybody in that scenario would be like, I don't like the way that she was acting. She needs to be brought down a, you know, a level. She needs to be brought down a peg. And everyone's motives and reactions to people. And it's that typical thing of like, you know, if you're nice to everybody, then, you know, you should sort of get by in life. And I think that this is what that is showcasing as well, is that even if you have that glimmer of an argument or a kind of bad relationship or jealousy, then that can really quickly, people can turn on you. And that's what that critic's got the power to do that. And then you see other characters kind of use their power in that same way. But yeah, I think line-wise, you know, there's so many like, you know, great ones.
Name some.
But when they're just having some of the arguments. So I think one of the ones that stood out to me is when it's like Bill and Margot, when he's like, outside of a beehive, Margot, your behavior would be considered either queenly or motherly. And then she's like, you're in a beehive, pal, didn't you know? We're all busy little bees full of stings making honey day and night. Aren't we, honey? And it's just, again, that use of just like taking, oh, bees, honey, ain't that right, honey? So I'm like, you're watching it being like, this isn't realistic because nobody is that clever or on point or like witty. You know, all these characters are incredibly witty and incredibly well-versed and, you know, theatrical, but it's, you know, it's some of the stuff that makes this kind of enjoyable.
I will say my favorite quote of the film, and it just caught me off guard. It's when DeWitt was basically just laying down the law with Eve, and he just turns at one point and goes, "That I should want you at all suddenly strikes me as the height of improbability." I don't know why. I just sort of went like, "Ooh, burn." Why is that so devastating?
I feel like there's a lot of films like nowadays where they try and get very like real dialogue, which I do like. I do like films like that. But I do kind of like the novelty of, this very, obviously it's very sort of self-aware, but that theatrical kind of, that's not what people speak like day to day. But I liked it in this. It was campy, it was funny, and it worked for me.
Okay, take those cassettes, rewind them, and play them again, because it's time for VHS Corner. This week, as already alluded to, we have Sarah walking us through a little bit of the behind the scenes of what's going on, so take it away.
So as we've mentioned, this film has received lots of Oscar nominations and wins. So this holds the record for the most female acting Oscar nominations in a single film with 4. We have Anne Baxter, Bette Davis for Best Actress, and Celeste Holm and Thelma Ritter for the Best Supporting Actress. This also shares the record for most Oscar nominations with 14, the same as Titanic and La La Land. On top of that, we have Bette Davis, who also fell in love with her co-star, Gary Merrill, during the shoot of this film, and the two married in July 1950, a few weeks after filming was completed, and they adopted a baby girl who they named Margot. So it's all coming round back. It's all about Eve, shall we say. The original working title of this film was Best Performance, so it would have been fun to hear things like George Sanders won the Oscar for Best Performance by an actor in a supporting role for the Best Performance. As we've mentioned, we also have Marilyn Monroe star in this film, and there's a scene where Bette Davis mentions playwright Arthur Miller, who Marilyn Monroe later goes on to marry. Again, this is all connecting to a lot of people. And as Stefano mentioned earlier, this was originally written by Mary Orr, and it was based on a short radio play called The Wisdom of Eve, which was published in an issue of Cosmopolitan magazine in 1946. Orr was inspired by the experience of the Polish-born actress Elizabeth Bergner, who had once befriended a dishonest young actress. And more recently, she claimed the Eve Harrington character was a combination of many young actresses she had met in her experience. So what do you guys think about some of those facts?
Interesting how the film incorporated in so many people's lives as well. Like, yeah, I like the joke there about it's all about Eve, in the sense of like, it is all about Eve, as in all about Eve the film, because it has influenced their lives so much. And kind of funny that, again, we're kind of talking about the role of women in Hollywood. And again, you don't want to be put into this box and have this element of, you want to empower them, etc. But then it's like Bette Davis found her husband through this film. And you're like, no, Betty. But then like they adopted like.
But that's fine. Like, yeah. we're not saying that women shouldn't get in relationships anymore.
But the fact that it was obviously a very sweet relationship, in the fact that it went as far, that they adopted a baby, etc., and was so influential that they named their child after that character. That's a really nice thing, I think.
I also think it's quite ironic that it was 1950 that gave us the film that had the film for the most acting nominations for women, considering something that we've talked about a lot in the past. A lot of Oscar nominations for women seem to be either just one or two films, or even just female-led performances tend to be the ones that dominate. So the fact that it was back then, that it was just one massive ensemble film that got all of these nominations, and we're meant to have progressed in society. What the hell have we been doing? Or is it just all of the female talent is now being spread out as opposed to just all concentrated into this one film? I think that's an interesting parallel to probably look at sometime.
And I guess the fact that the author as well was influenced by so many people, which again makes sense through the dialogue. And I guess even the fact it's based on a book also like lends itself to why this has such a great script. But that also shows...
I'm not sure if that's the exact translation, right? I don't think it was like word for word things that have been said in the book.
But again, like if you were doing Shakespeare or something then, or Dickens.
Yeah, because that's a play. Of course, if you take a play, you're going to use the dialogue.
I'm just saying you've got a...
This version of Romeo and Juliet's a lot more street cred than I remember.
I'm just saying you have some source material as opposed to just what's in your head. Steph, any reactions there to the facts?
Only just realized that there were a lot of female characters in here, and nearly none, and every time they were having conversations, nearly never mention any of the male characters.
Oh, yeah, this is a film that was absolutely... Yeah, past the Bechdel. I was dying to say that earlier.
Sorry, Greg.
No, it's all good. I'm glad it came up. Speaking of things I wanted to say earlier that can come up, can I now say...
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so the voice of Shere Khan was in this film.
Yeah. So George Sanders...
So DeWitt, basically.
Yeah, so he is the voice of Shere Khan in Jungle Book. And as he was talking, I was like, where do I know this guy's voice from? And then...
See, I pegged it quite quickly. I just didn't want to assume. So when I did the IMDb, I was like, yes, I was right.
But something else fun I found from it was that he played Shere Khan, but can you also guess like what other kind of franchise he's been in? Batman. He was Mr. Freeze in the Adam West TV show.
Oh, dear Lord.
So it's literally like him, like, I think doing some sort of like Scandinavian sort of accent or something. And it's basically just him in like a silver suit with like a bunch of like robber kind of looking guys. And he's just there and like, you know, with smoke around him and ice. And then I think, whether it's in the same episodes or eventually, but he has just kind of like a space suit on essentially with like a gun. But yeah, you're kind of, it's weird to hear him with the kind of same inflection and the same kind of like pompousness, but with some weird kind of like Arnie Schwarzenegger kind of accent at the same time.
That's the sort of time where you question what's happened to your career.
So yeah, he's had a very varied career, I would say. But again, like a lot of these actors, they went on to do loads of things, but you can really see how their heyday and their prime time was during the 50s and the 60s and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely an influential film, which leads us nicely to the movie vault this week. So for anyone new to the podcast, we like to think of this as a time capsule of memorable movies for someone to dig up in the future. So should All About Eve from 1950 gain the honor of a place in our movie vault and be remembered for all time? Di has departed now, as he was feeling a bit ill, as we've already established. So what does Di think about whether All About Eve, whether that should go in the movie vault?
No, I don't think it needs to go in the movie vault. It's all right. You know, Bette Davis is brilliant, but there's probably she's got better movies out there.
Mic drop. Bye-bye.
She's got better movies out there.
Thanks, Di. Bye-bye.
I should probably sing that again later, because that was clever. That was really clever.
So that's Di's thoughts and opinions there. Let's go to the person who has the most experience with this film next. So, Stefanos, what do you think?
I think it would be way too dishonest if I say no at this point. So, yeah, I mean, you know, Sunset Boulevard is already in your vault. So it'd be nice to have one more thing that these two films are connected with. So... yeah, both of them released the same year, both of them being up for Oscars and also being in the movie vault. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought was the interesting context again, is of like what's already in there. And it's the fact that Sunset Boulevard's in there. I was like, oh, is this going to be detrimental or to its benefit? Sarah, what do you think? Not so much specifically about the Sunset Boulevard, but just this film as a standalone going in.
I mean, obviously it's very different to Demolition Man.
Yes.
You could say it.
Yeah, I don't think it'll cause as much arguments. Well, I never know, depending on what the answer is.
Well, yeah, I thought that overall this was, you know, we've talked about a lot of the negatives, but I do think it was a good film. There's lots of things to take away from it that I really enjoyed. I would watch it again. It's like a good Sunday afternoon film. Maybe you're doing something at the same time. I would definitely watch it again. So I think it should go in the vault.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So yeah, I think for me, it was more that Sunset Boulevard being in their element, and especially lately, because again, we're talking about like how things are changing and how the episodes are influencing each other, and especially again what Darren was saying a few weeks ago in our Full Monty episode of having that, like, you know, you might not get this chance again, and is something already in there representing that. And even though again we've made the point before of, again, a film doesn't need to necessarily only be representing something, or if it doesn't represent something, doesn't mean it's not a good film. As we said, you know, we are well good movies. Is it worth watching? Is it a good movie? And I definitely would agree that it is. I think, like Sarah said, I think it's a great Sunday movie. I think there shows all the great strengths of that time in Hollywood. But I think it's just, for me, unfortunately, it's because the very core of this film is about that kind of like Hollywood and those jaded stars. And because that is all pretty much in Sunset Boulevard, I think obviously there's some slight variations, but I think because the main purpose and the main story of it is in another film, which most of us have said is done more successfully in another film, which is in the vault. I'd have to disagree with Steph in the sense I don't think it then means that they should go hand in hand. I think it's that film is already there in some way or concept. And I think that, yes, obviously Bette Davis does a fantastic performance. and it's a great film with some great dialogue, etc. But I'm not sure if I could then say, oh, well, that brings it above all other films at that time period, which might star Bette Davis or Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah, I'm broadly in agreement. I think at the point where we've mentioned Sunset Boulevard so many times, but we've never really had that opportunity to say, here's what this film does more successfully than Sunset Boulevard. I think at that point, for me, that comparison is detrimental for me wanting to put it in, especially considering that, like, I'm obviously not going to downplay the good parts of this film as a whole. I agree. I think it's wonderfully written insofar as like the character interactions. I just think that the focus of where those interactions needed to happen were in unbalanced areas. I think that the way it's blocked, and I think the final scene, Steph is right. I think it is very well shot. But at the point where I think the character progression wasn't going in the way that naturally made sense in some areas. Whereas with Sunset Boulevard, the way in which they wanted to focus on the idea of reclaiming lost fame and the ways in which sort of that idea of fame corrupts people and just warps them, I think was much more successful. So that's why I think in that comparison, I think, unfortunately, because there have been a lot of films that we've done in that sort of, we've done the side-by-side comparisons and we've discarded for whatever reasons. That's why I'm on the side of, I don't think it makes it in this time. Again, I think this were a case of if there were segments of the vault where we would put certain things of films in for different reasons. So, for example, when we talked about The Brave Little Toaster, I said if we could have like a segment just for music, I'd put the music of that film in. At the very least. Here, I would definitely put in... I would put in performances, right? Even the same for when we, like ages ago, when we did Erin Brockovich, right? I thought it should have gone in purely because of Sandra Bullock's performance. But obviously it didn't go in because the consent...
What? Sandra Bullock?
So, I've screwed that up. That's my mistake.
Julia Roberts.
Julia Roberts. I'm so sorry.
Oh my God.
Look, it's
not that memorable.
Look, it's hot here. I'm slightly recovering from sunstroke. And just, you picture it. Picture a woman's eyes and you just imagine a different face around them. I'm sorry, like it's the Bette Davis eyes effect. So yeah, that mistake aside, I don't think it invalidates any of my actual arguments. That's why I think, unfortunately, I don't think this film goes in.
I think it's like we've said before, again, without getting complex of being like, oh, well, there's different things in the vault for different reasons, etc. Or like, this bit of a film could go in. I think it's just purely like, if we're in this world in which that film can still exist, you can still seek out that piece of music or that performance. I think it's just, again, that, if you want to make that separation of these are the more exceptional, or this is that great representation of it. And I think it's a unique situation because we've not had it before in which actually...
The thing we're comparing it to is already in the vault.
But also we've not had it in which, like, they're both stellar, in which something which it's still good, or it didn't do it as well, or something is like, oh, it's an okay film, or it's a nice film, but it's just not good enough on it, like something like Rush Hour, which we're talking about.
For me, this is just vindication because Sunset Boulevard didn't win the Oscar and this did. This is my no. We're retroactively correcting history.
But I think it's just the fact that you can still have a film that can be exceptional, can be fantastic, can be brilliant, but not necessarily, again, go in the vault because of various reasons. And maybe that means that this film will also be another one I can use as a example, apart from having to use Avatar every time I have to mention a famous good in some eyes film, not going into the vault. I think if this film was to be on the side, it should just have the title that Stefanos gave it earlier, which is just All About Eve, brackets, it's not though. That's what we'll remember.
That's just what the director's cut is.
Yeah. So, another film not in the vault this week. Will next time's film break this chain? But we don't know what that film is yet, but it will be decided through our always fun endgame.
We're in the endgame now.
It's so annoying.
Okay, endgame time. This game is simply called The Spotlight is on Who. So, obviously, this is a film very much about the lives of fake actors, and it got me thinking about all of the various actors within, or I should say, actors within films and TV that are quite influential. So what I've done is I've got a list of a variety of different actors who are in films. So these are the actor characters, not the actual real life actor who plays them. So for example, if I were to give you the name Eve Harrington, what I'm looking for then is the film or TV show that they appear in. So David, if I were to say to you Eve Harrington, they appear in
All About Eve.
Correct. So what this will be, this is a quick fire round, so I will read them out, and then you effectively will buzz in if you think you've got the answer. So for this, I'll need your idea of a virtual buzzer. In this case, it's just either saying your name or like a word of your choice. So Sarah, what would your buzzer be?
Margot.
Margot? And Steph?
Now for the modern classic Barbie, Sublime.
So we've got Margot versus Sublime. We've had weirder confrontations on this show.
That's the next A24 film, Margot versus Sublime.
But as David alluded to, we need to know exactly what it is that we'll be playing for. So as always, we'll be choosing the film for next episode based on this game. So I believe all four of us have a suggestion of something we would like to see put forward. So I'll guess if you win, you can choose either your film or one of the other film suggestions going forward. So this time, I think we'll start with Steph. Give us a little teaser about the film that you'd bring forward and why.
So I changed mine 3 times during the podcast.
Okay.
Because I'm like, I don't know anymore. Because I was saying so many things all about it, and I'm like, oh, that's actually a really good connection with that one. I think I'm gonna go with a film from 1979, and it is about the performing arts, and both Broadway and Hollywood. Yes, that's about it.
Okay, interesting. David, tell us a little bit about your film.
So mine is from 1968, so 18 years after the film we're discussing today. And my main inspiration with this one was, again, we're talking about like things that are indicative of the time. I think this is very indicative of the time it was made, but also we're talking about adaptations and theatrics. And I think that in this film, All About Eve, it's obviously about the theatre and about staging. So it got me thinking about other films which have been adapted in some way or have been continued even into things like stage plays. And this is a very specific example because it's not even an actually full form stage play. It's a play within another piece of media. So the film I'm suggesting, it takes, this is the original source material, and we've seen it kind of referenced and adapted in different ways. And it kind of takes the theatricality of these kind of movies and has a lot of fun. This original source material has a lot of the theatrics which we expect, but in adaptations, we've seen a lot of fun poked at it. And we've seen the kind of theatrics that play out in this movie, such as somebody not knowing how to play the piano anymore, but then they suddenly can.
Wait, which year was that?
1968.
I think I know what David's doing.
Yeah.
He's being such a wanker. You are such a prick. Okay, moving on. Sarah, tell us a little bit about your suggestion.
Okay, so my suggestion, it came out in 1977, and it's very much similar to All About Eve, sort of thematically. Again, it sort of focuses around the theatre and the behind the scenes and people within those roles. And again, it also is the same in the fact that it focuses around a older actress who focuses in her sort of last few days in the lead up to an opening night of her next play. And then there's some events that unfold that cause her to spiral and the people around her, and it's just this very much sort of consuming event as the tension builds to the opening of this play.
Okay, fantastic. And finally, my film suggestion from 2004. So you've all gone for the performing arts. I have not. I focused on a different aspect of this film connection, which is that I mentioned earlier that a lot of the films we've been covering recently have been very women confrontational, and I don't think that the ways in which they've been done is necessarily been done in a very good way. I think I have a film in which this is done in probably the only setting where I think you'll actually get any form of intrigue and relatability to this, which is very much a a teenage school setting. So I've chosen the film which is very culturally relevant insofar as the ways in which a lot of these sort of battles with each other play out. And I would love for us to discuss it on this film podcast. But will I get that chance, or will it be one of the other various film suggestions that we have in front of us? Only time will tell, and by that I mean the winner of this endgame. So, contestants, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
See.
So, your first actor. We'll start with Blousy Brown.
Margot.
Yep.
Charlie Brown. Snoopy. Something like that.
Unfortunately, that is not correct.
I don't know.
Steph, do you have any guess?
Blousy Brown. I feel I've heard this name before. I don't know why I'm rhyming. I don't know.
Was any of that rhyming?
Wait. Okay. It's something that I don't like. I think something I don't like. Is it something like oh, it's a stupid musical with the kids.
It could be.
Something Malone.
5, 4,
Looney Tunes.
3, 2.
Something
1.
Malone. The Brownie Malone. No.
Very close.
Is the answer we're looking for Brownie Malone? No, it's
Bugsy.
not. I cannot accept that, even though Bugsy Malone is the correct answer.
Oh, wow. I'm glad. I was like tempted to give it to you, like just say it, just to be like, you know,
It's because we had the show when I was used to working in theater.
Yeah, it's why I thought people might know it, to be fair. Okay, are we ready for the next actor? Truman Burbank.
Oh, Margot.
Sarah?
The Truman Show?
Yes, that is correct. You may not know it, but he is an actor in his own show.
Like, that's an interesting way of thinking about it, yeah.
Yeah. Are we ready for the next contestant, for the next actor?
Go on.
Misa Amane.
Oh, you also said shows. Sublime.
Yep. Steph?
Yeah, Death Note.
That is correct.
I've never seen this thing.
Yeah.
And there is a film adaptation, actually, isn't there, for Netflix?
Yeah, but I'm not sure if she appears in it because I've not done that to myself. Okay.
I think they gave her a different name, but yeah, don't watch it.
Yeah. Next up, we have Johnny Cage.
Sublime.
Steph?
I think I'm gonna hate myself, but it's Mortal Kombat.
You hate yourself. This is the correct answer.
Yeah.
It also sounds like Steph is like replying to the answer, you know, to the Johnny Cage. Sublime. Big fan.
Next up, Kirk Lazarus.
Sublime.
Steph?
I hate that I know this shit. It's so toxic. Tropic Thunder.
That is also correct.
I was waiting for Tropic Thunder to show up.
I'm doing so bad.
It's fine. There's every chance that you could come up. I mean, I don't think it's possible that Steph will know every single one of these.
No.
Right, next up. Satine.
Margot.
Sarah?
Alien?
It's unfortunately not Alien. Alien, the film famous for actors. Sorry. Steph, any guess?
It doesn't help that I just watched Ahsoka and I'm thinking only Sabine right
I
now.
know, yeah. And Satine is in Clone Wars.
Yeah, as well. So this is not helping.
And you're wearing a Grogu t-shirt as well.
In a Grogu. Can you tell me if it's a show or a film?
Oh yeah, this is a film. I think there's only one other TV show on this list, so
pass.
The answer I was looking for was Moulin Rouge.
Oh, of course.
I originally had Christian, but I thought that was way too hard, so I changed it to Satine. Right, next up, Rick Dalton.
Sublime.
Steph?
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Why do I know all the toxic ones?
Okay, let's see if this falls in line with Steph's characterization of toxic. Because next up we have Mr. Peanut Butter. Really? This is a surprise.
Sublime.
Steph?
BoJack Horseman.
Yes, that is correct.
You're picking things I've never seen.
There's a lot of bewildered faces from Sarah in this game.
I thought BoJack Horseman was well known.
I think it's tricky though when you have to put yourself in the space of television and film. That's the thing as well.
Okay.
He said there's only one more, so I guess
But that was the TV one.
That's gone now.
Also, there should be absolutely no excuse for this next one.
Oh.
Right, next up, Nora Desmond.
It's been said several times.
No.
Movie vault.
Oh, Margot.
So this is tricky. I think Steph whispered Sublime, but I'm not sure. I think I will give it to Sarah because Sarah was clearer. Sarah?
I'm going to lose anyway. So, Sunset Boulevard.
Yes.
Yay.
Yeah.
And I'll also say this is another film that has been mentioned, granted not to the same extent, but the next actress we have is Mia Dolan. It's a film that Sarah thinks is overrated.
Sublime.
Steph?
La La Land.
Yeah.
I'm going to flip this table.
Hey, I got La La Land, you got Sunset Boulevard, so fair trade.
Moving on, number 11. Gem.
Pardon? Could you repeat, please?
Gem. I'll give you a hint. Gem is also in the name of the film.
Margot.
Yep.
Uncut Gems.
Oh.
Not that kind of gem, unfortunately. It's spelled with a J, not a G, unfortunately.
Oh, you didn't tell me that.
Sublime.
Yep.
Jen and the Holograms?
That is the answer we were looking for.
I was trying to think of the name of that. Is that like based off a show or something? Or...
It's a graphic novel, is it not?
Oh, okay.
I think. I don't know. All right, so David, let's just have a look at the scores.
So it is 6 to Stefanos and 2 points to Sarah.
There's every chance we can end in a draw. Next up, Gary Johnston.
Gary's always going to be a tricky one, isn't it?
No one called Gary.
Not anymore, there aren't. They've actually run studies. It's becoming an extinct name.
My poor dad.
I'll give you a hint. This is a puppet film.
Margot.
Yep.
The Muppets.
It is not the Muppets, unfortunately. But not a bad guess, given they also have some incredibly human names at times.
Mm.
So it's not a Muppet film.
It's not the Muppet.
I mean, obviously, it's not Treasure Island. Sublime?
Go for it.
Muppets Most Wanted.
It's not Muppets Most Wanted.
Damn it.
So, Steph, you'll be happy. This is a toxic one you didn't get. This was Team America World Police.
That other puppet film. I guess the fact that Craig said puppet that I was...
It's a puppet film that I desperately want to talk about on this show at some point.
It's because you said... you wouldn't have obviously said Muppet, but I think you wouldn't have said puppet if it wasn't...
Yeah.
Thunderbird style.
Okay. So, next up, Don Lockwood.
Margot.
Yep.
Don John? Is that a film?
I have no idea, but
that
it's
is
not
a film. But...
That is a film. That's not the answer I'm looking for, unfortunately. Any guesses, Steph?
I think I'm having an aneurysm. Guys, I know that name.
That's
so
what I
well.
aim for.
Why do I know that name? I'm gonna go for a guess.
Go for it.
But I think it's correct. Sublime.
Yep.
Singing in the Rain.
That is the correct answer.
Thank goodness.
It's a bad time to say I've never seen Singing in the Rain.
Ooh.
Okay, next, and I think you'll want to be quick off the mark on this one. Sarah Marshall.
Margot.
There we go, Sarah.
Forgetting Sarah Marshall?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yep. Just
That's
needs
a bad film.
Right. The final actor we have Trevor Slattery.
Sublime.
Steph.
God damn it. Oh, Iron Man 3 / Shang-Chi and the Legends of the Ten Rings.
Oh.
That is specifically correct answer.
I was like, as you said Iron Man 3, I was like, oh, I'm going to jump in and be like, oh, and you could have another film, but you did it for me.
I can't believe I didn't get Sunset Boulevard, but I got all the other movies.
So, David, give us a breakdown of those final scores.
So it ended with Sarah on a respectable 3 points, but Stefanos taking the win with 8.
I feel dirty.
Well done.
Well done, Steph.
Congratulations. You know your actors within films. How do you feel?
Yeah, why couldn't I know the nice ones? Why did I have to know the blackface and the other ones?
So, as the winner, you get a choice of any one of the 4 films that you have. So, do you want to go with your film? Do you want to go with Sarah's, mine, or David's?
And I still don't know what they are. You see, Greg, your 2004 film, I feel it's gonna be something I don't like. I don't know why. I have that feeling, so I'm not gonna go there. Dave, I'm always scared of your choices. You know what? I'll be, because obviously my decision was like the 3rd choice within the last 2 hours. So
Okay.
I'm gonna go with Sarah's.
Hey.
There we go. Everybody's a winner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
So,
But what was it though?
yeah. So, Sarah, now is the time. Tell us a little bit about why you chose this film, but then fundamentally what the film is.
So yes, as I mentioned before, this film is very much thematically similar to All About Eve, but in a bit more of a more modern setting in 1977. So the film I've chosen is Opening Night.
Oh.
Okay.
I haven't seen it personally, but it seems to
Oh.
be popular amongst theatre fans, and it seemed to be very similar in terms of the narrative which Margot goes on in this sort of journey. So I was curious to see that as well. So hopefully everyone else is excited for that one as well.
Nice. I'm a big fan of people who come in with blind choices. A couple of episodes I got criticized for blindly suggesting films.
I wouldn't say you got criticized. They were just
They were
intrigued.
they were confused.
Okay.
It was just like, wait, you've never seen it, but you're suggesting it.
Yeah, I mean it's supposed to be critically pretty good. You know, the reviews were good on Letterboxd. So
Oh, that's not the films I
appropriate.
blindly choose. I blindly choose crap.
But yeah, anyway, opening night that you can catch if you want to watch along with us at home. Always worth check in, Just Watch or some other apps, or just having a look around your streaming services, because sometimes this can be obviously a bit more outdated by the time the episode comes out. But currently, you can catch it as a part of your subscription with Mubi or BFI Player, which are also both Amazon channels, which again, sometimes they just decide, oh, let's just put it on Amazon. So search it up on Amazon and you'll see whether it's a part of a subscription for another service, you have to pay for it, or whether it's part of Amazon. But you can also rent it on places like Chili as well. And yeah, possibly there's a physical release out there as well. Maybe Sarah will have a look in the VHS corner once the recording's done. She'll dust it off amongst the DVD and Blu-ray section. But yeah, I think we're in for an interesting time, especially after, again, we've talked about Showgirls, Neon Demon, All About Eve, and then the opening to this summary says actress Myrtle Gordon is a functioning alcoholic.
Oh,
So
Yeah.
so will Sarah be bringing the chaos once more?
But
as
bear
she
in mind,
did?
this is also now going to be our lead into Halloween as well.
Yeah. Oh god. So Sarah, are you happy that you might have led to psycho women, horror films or something like that?
Hey, that's another kind of feminism, making them the killers. So
Okay, right. Well, yeah, thank you very much for joining us both and joining us on the Well Good Movies crew. It's been very fun as a collective, introducing everyone at home to some of the people who will be joining us more regularly, and we can't wait to welcome more of the regulars on, and we'll still have special guests, as we always do as well, joining us. Anything you guys want to shout out in terms of any projects, anything to go watch or see?
I mean, I'm always on YouTube talking films. So there's a few reviews coming up, a few new releases, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Past Lives. So if you've been at the cinema recently, head over to my channel. It's probably the best thing to do and hear my thoughts, which I'm sure everyone will disagree with.
Well, right now I'm moving in between places, so I'm doing that for now. But I will be purchasing my tickets for the BFI London Film Festival this year. Specifically making savings for that. I'm really looking forward to it. And also I'm working on my own scripts at the moment. Well, working, just me sitting silently in a room, just staring on the wall, and I'm like, just write, and nothing happens. But yeah, but I'll be looking forward to your views on opening night. That is actually one of my favorite John Cassavetes films. I've But I'm very happy that one went in because I really want to see your point of view in all this. Because John Cassavetes is a hoot. I mean, was but rest in peace.
Yeah, well, we can't wait to discuss that film. It's going to be a fun one next time. Myself, if people do want to check my socials as well, even you catch me at David Oscar on X or whatever you want to call that now. That's where I'll be giving sort of opinions of things they're watching, whether that's cinema trips after going with Craig, or things that I'm watching in between all these crazy films as well. Craig, anything lastly from yourself?
Yeah, I've just got something I want to whisper to you.
Right.
That I would want you at all suddenly strikes me as the height of improbability.
Okay. Sarah's face here, like, what is going on?
I feel like me and Steph shouldn't be here. That was very interesting.
No, I think you need to be here for his safety.
The fear on my face probably was like, call the police. Okay, so yeah, join us next time anyway for opening night. It's been a great discussion today, talking about all about Eve. We hope the die gets better as well. And yeah, we'll see everyone next time. And it's been a lot of fun. Catch you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Sublime.
To keep up with the latest episodes of Well Good Movies, you can listen to us on all your usual podcast outlets, including Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Don't forget to follow us, subscribe, and rate us where you can to keep our podcast growing. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Well Good Movies to keep up with the latest news and highlights from all our episodes, as well as tell us what movies you want to be discussed in the future. So what are you waiting for? Go check out the film we'll be discussing in next time's episode.
I'm going to flip this table.